Success! Oh, hi. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to be with you. I'm going to go through this one as fast as I possibly can because, oh my goodness, we all know how I can ramble, but boy, was there a lot of influential and impactful movies for me that came out in the year 1987. There's so many that I had to cram in this little note thing I was doing that I'm gonna have to cross them off. So forgive me. I got notes that I'm going to have to reference. I'll do my best to go through them as fast as I can and just mention what needs to be mentioned. But we'll see how that goes. There was a lot of movies, a lot of great movies that came out in the year 1987 when I turned 4 years old. Specifically, that came out the month of my 4th birthday, in June. But, bear with me. Let's start with January of 1987 was a little movie called The Living Daylights. That is a James Bond film, and I'm only mentioning it because he only did 2 films, but Timothy Dalton is, and will probably forever be my favorite Bond. Everyone has their Bond, whether it's Connery or Brosnan or Moore or Craig. For me, it's Dalton. Timothy Dalton is my Bond. I think he's the best, perfect. He's the best Bond. The thing that comes to mind is writing down a snow mountain hill, some snow, on a cello case, something about a cello. I don't know if that was The Living Daylights. It might have been the other one, but anyway. And also a cable car. Timothy Dalton's the man. Moving on. So that was January. What else? What's after that? I'm prepared, I swear. It looks like June. Everything's littered in June. My goodness gracious. So many things came out in June of 1987. Let's go with June 5th. Harry and the Hendersons. Great movie. I have so many childhood memories of that movie, of the family renting that movie, and I remember being at the, I believe it was a Blockbuster at the time. I remember being at the Blockbuster. We rented Harry and the Hendersons, and my parents let me get some candy as well. So my brothers and I, we got some Pop Rocks. Pop Rocks. So, the classic, as much as I love that film, when I think of Harry and the Hendersons, I think of Pop Rocks. And when I think of Pop Rocks, I think of Harry and the Hendersons. So, lots of core childhood memories there. Next, we've got June 12th. A little film starring Arnold Schwarzenegger called Predator came out. Now, I didn't see it any time around then, obviously. But maybe when I was, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, somewhere around there, we went on vacation in Canada, where I'm from, my homeland. I hope everybody watched the Super Bowl and learned a little something about how amazing Canadians are and all the wonderful things we've given you. Yeah, I'm taking partial credit for that. Anywho, when we were on vacation, the friends of the family, my parents' friends that we were staying with, had a VHS tape of Predator. Well, they had all kinds of VHS tapes, because their thing was, they had HBO. And they were able to record these movies on VHS tape. So they had a whole collection of movies that they recorded, and these were movies that my brothers and I would never have had access to, or been allowed around. So while the adults were off having their grand old time, we were going through their movies and watching stuff. So that's how I was able to see Predator for the first time. A good time. My brother watched it first and told me about it, and then I watched it, and good time. I wonder what year Pumping Iron came out. I should have looked that up. Because Pumping Iron, boy, I could talk about that movie. It gives me the feeling of coming. Anyway, so Predator, good time. What's next? What? Oh, June 17th, a little movie called Benji the Hunted. I think it was a sequel to the original Benji. It's about a dog. Not a big dog person anymore, but when I was a kid, I was, and I loved that movie Benji, and I thoroughly remember bear cubs and a hunter, and then like another guy that was helping Benji, and he had like this puzzle thing. It was like one of those horseshoe things with the ring and the two horseshoes with connected the chain, and then it had a ring in the middle, and you gotta. It was something like that, and that was the first time I'd ever been like, "Whoa, that's really cool." And then shortly thereafter, got my hands on something like that, and ever since I've been a big fan of those kind of puzzle things. I've got some really cool ones around here somewhere. I like those kind of puzzle, like make this thing turn into this, or get these things to detach, but it looks like it's impossible. I'll never forget when I first found out how to do the horseshoe puzzle thing with the ring. Pretty crazy. Blew my mind. So, I mentioned that. Next, we've got June 19th, it looks like, was a movie called Adventures in Babysitting. Classic. I remember watching that as a very young person, loving every second of it, because it really is like, whether you're 5 or 10 or 15, the dream of an adventure, of a possible adventure you could have. Out in the city, all kinds of things could happen. You could run into the wrong person and get a knife in your foot, or you could run into the right person and it's Vincent D'Onofrio playing Thor. Yeah, that's my Thor. Mr. D'Onofrio. Good movie. Plus, it also introduced me to Elizabeth Shue, who even at that early age, I had a very big crush on. She's pretty. And she continued to be pretty, and she still is pretty, and I've had a crush on her ever since. I love Elizabeth Shue. I love everything she does. And Hamlet 2. That's a good movie. Elizabeth Shue is amazing, and I love her. And I discovered her all with that opening montage of, and then he kissed me with Elizabeth Shue, and I was like, she's pretty. So yeah, there was that. There was Adventures in Babysitting. What else? What do we got left in June here? It looks like June 24th, a little film called Spaceballs. My brothers and I loved that movie growing up. We quoted it all the time. I do to this day. Pizza the Hut ate himself to death. Spaceballs the flamethrower. I was just clearing my throat. I mean, it's a classic. Who doesn't love Spaceballs? That was probably my introduction to Mel Brooks. I'm not a huge fan of other of his classics, like Young Frankenstein or Blazing Saddles. But The Producers is one of my favorite movies of all time. The musical based on the movie. I've never seen the original, but big fan of Mel Brooks overall. And it all started with Spaceballs, of course. Spaceballs the movie. Anywho, okay, also in June 26th of 1987, a film called Full Metal Jacket. I'm just going to mention that movie because I have to, because it's Full Metal Jacket, and it's a brilliant, genius masterpiece done by Stanley Kubrick. And I saw it eventually, maybe when I was like 15 or so. Probably on like cable television before I really delved into it and saw it in its entirety at like maybe the age of 20 or 25. Before I really appreciated Kubrick and his work. That film, I recently watched it. That film is just, it's a masterpiece. Full Metal Jacket is a masterpiece of the horrors of war and Vietnam and just, and the military and brainwash. Speaking of Vincent D'Onofrio, an amazing talent. So he was both Thor in Adventures in Babysitting of that year, and Gomer Pyle in Full Metal Jacket of that year. Both roles terrifying in different ways. He's a big guy. Smart big guys are scary. Dumb big guys are scary too. Especially crazy ones. Don't bully people. You'll never know if they're just gonna shoot you. Anywho, cool. Is that it with June? I think that's it with June. Moving on. We've only got a few left, I swear. I'm making this fast, though, aren't I? We're making good time. What do we got here? I'm looking through the numbers. We've got July. July of 1987, July 1st, Canada Day. A little film called Inner Space. If you've never heard of Inner Space, I feel sorry for you and you should look it up. It stars Martin Short and Dennis Quaid and Melanie Griffith. No, not Melanie Griffith. What am I thinking? What's her name? Meg Ryan. A young Meg Ryan. Great movie. Oh, great movie. Great movie. It's literally about Martin Short thinking he's going crazy when he hears voices in his head, but it's Dennis Quaid who was accidentally injected into his body. So it's a shrunk down story. I love my shrunk down stories, just like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Did we go over that? I think so. Or is that on this list? I don't know. I'm sure it's coming up at some point. Oh, I went over it in something else. Anyway, here we. I love shrunk down stories. And a little guy inside a silly guy's body. Hilarity ensues. Great fun adventures. It's got the doctor from Voyager. He's the cowboy. It's a great time. Great movie. Check it out. Inner Space. And then they did the recent movie. I don't even remember what it's called because it was so bad. It's on Disney Plus right now. And it's got Dennis Quaid. And it's about... And it's like Avatar meets Inner Space. They should have really played into the Inner Space aspect, but... Anywho. Moving on. Spoiler alert. Strange World, that's what it was. Hated that movie. They should have leaned on the Inner Space aspect, but they didn't. Missed opportunity. Also in July of 1987 was a film called RoboCop. I wouldn't discover it until I was slightly older and found the trilogy on cable television, and I just loved it. I didn't understand at the time, obviously, what it really was. You know, the satire of capitalism and consumerism and police and violence and media, all that stuff, and the brilliance of the original film. Obviously, all that went over my head at the time. I just was like, oh, look, cool, robot man, shoot stuff. And I loved the action figures and the toys. But I have to mention that movie because I was, at a time, obsessed, well, not obsessed, but I was a huge fan of all the RoboCop films, the RoboCop toys, and everything RoboCop related. So, RoboCop, classic film. Looks like August 7th, 1987. 8787. That's a masterful date for Masters of the Universe. That's right, the original He-Man film, Masters of the Universe. Say what you will, for me, that's nostalgia on fire. I would call it a guilty pleasure, but I don't feel guilty, and it's not about pleasure. It's just enjoyment. As a kid, my brothers and I loved that movie. As an adult, I still love that movie to this day. I could watch that movie anytime. It's fun. It's funny. It's silly. A movie just needs to be entertaining. Granted, sure, oh, it's not like the sword material. No, are you kidding me? Skeletor is a boss in that movie. That movie's awesome, okay? It tasted good. Like, oh, my brothers and I loved that movie. It's hilarious. And Courtney Cox! And another cast member from Voyager. I can't make this stuff up. So, great movie. You got the key and the music and the adventure here on Earth, and then you go to Eternia. In Eternia, we don't say goodbye. We say good journey. Anyway, great movie. Looks like September 18th of 1987 was a film called Hellraiser. I wouldn't discover it till later in life, probably in my teenage years, but my best friend and I plowed through 1, 2, 3, 4, and then found 5 at the video store shortly after it came out, and then obsessed over 6 when it came out. That's pretty much all you really need. Hellraiser 1 through 6, I will attest to all of them. I think 1 is great. I think 2 is great. I think 3 is fantastic. I think 4 is amazing. I think 5 is the best. And I think 6 is a brilliant conclusion. The Hellraiser franchise, yes sir. My friend and I, when we were teenagers, and we were on a particular drug at the time, we were awake a lot, and he did some drawings of us as Cenobites. I still have that drawing. and we're pretty cool Cenobites. Something about doing art when you're on... Anyway, that's for another video coming soon. But Hellraiser, love the whole franchise. Well, I don't like horror. I'm not a big fan of the horror genre at all. But Hellraiser, that's my jam. I've got action figures. I've got puzzle box replicas. Loves me, the Hellraiser, the lore, the mythology. I think it's perfect. We see where the box came from and what eventually happens to Pinhead in Hellraiser 3 with Adam Scott. Hellraiser 1 through 6, watch all those in a row. I promise you will have a good time. You don't have to like them. You don't need to take them seriously. But they're fun. They're fun. Looks like December 16th was a film called Overboard, starring Kurt Russell and what's-her-face. I believe they ended up getting married and had a child who is now another star, and she was just in the Knives Out sequel. I know their names, I swear. I'm too rushed right now. You can look it up. Overboard I remember specifically because it's one of those movies my mom rented when I was homesick from school. My mom would do that a lot if I was homesick from school. She'd go out, get chicken noodle soup, Canada Dry, ginger ale, and a movie. And some of these movies that I'm going to mention, some I have before, some yet to come, are a result of my mother renting them for me. Just, oh, I thought you might like this, and it's a movie I've never heard of, and I'm like, oh, and then it's about the lady who gets amnesia, and then... I just have fond, core childhood memories of the film Overboard. Classic. Classic. And, not last and not least, but runner-up here, well, last mentioned before the penultimate film I'm going to mention, came out in December of 1987, and it's called Batteries Not Included. Vivid core memories of this film. The little alien robots floating around in the in the apartment complex that was going to get torn down, but I remember the old guy who was also in Cocoon. Plenty of great characters. We save them, they save us. A very heartwarming story, produced by Steven Spielberg. Just a great classic film with these cute little robots that were like little flying saucers, but they were robots. But they looked like flying saucers. But they really were aliens. It was just a very original idea, and I've never seen anything like it before or since. And I remembered it very vividly growing up. But it was one of those, never really could get my hands on it or see it again until decades later. Oh my gosh, it's that movie! And fantastic, fantastic film. But I had some kind of toy. I don't know what it was, but it was meant for some kind of action figure. See, I don't know, but it was like a dish, and it had legs, 3 legs that came down. And it was supposed to be a vehicle for a figure, but it just looked exactly like one of those Batteries Not Included characters. So I just always pretended like it was one of those, and I loved that toy for that fact. You know, the imagination goes a long way. But the other weird thing about that is I vividly remembered my entire life, my childhood growing up, my young adulthood, and to this day, I remember the sequel, Batteries Not Included 2. And it was called Batteries Still Not Included. And I've done a lot of research in recent years, and apparently, supposedly, that movie doesn't exist. Never has. They attempted to produce a sequel a couple times that may or may not at one point have been called Batteries Still Not Included, but supposedly it doesn't exist. Never did. Talk about the Mandela effect, because I swear, I have vivid memories of the sequel, including the title, and they come back. So if that's true, and you're familiar with Batteries Still Not Included, comment below and let me know. Otherwise, I'm crazy. Anywho, the #1 most influential film that came out in 1987 for me and my life to this day is a little gem that was on that Holy Grail VHS tape that I mentioned in the 1985 video that had Ladyhawke, Willow, and The Princess Bride. That's right, The Princess Bride. Grew up loving that movie. Grew up quoting that movie, still to this day. Speaking of Ladyhawke, I'm literally in an hour about to watch Ladyhawke on the big screen for the first time in my life, and that's been on my bucket list my entire life, and I'm so freaking excited. But that was 2 videos ago. Moving on. The Princess Bride. Willow, by the way, is a really great show on Disney+, and you should give it a chance. It's really campy and fun, and don't take it seriously. Just have a good time, because it's a great show. Anywho, great characters. Great actors, too. I met him. But on the topic of Princess Bride and not being derailed, I swear, great movie. I recently watched it. I recently showed it to my son for the first time. Blew his freaking mind. He's 10 years old, and he loved every second of it. He had no idea what he was in for, what it was about, and he was just so excited. Memorized all kinds of lines of dialogue. Absolutely loved it. It was so much fun watching that with him. But I also remember a vivid core memory of, because this was on the VHS tape that had those 3 movies on it. It was me and my brother's Holy Grail. It was recorded from that family I mentioned before, and we ended up stealing it from them, and then they went, "Man, you can keep it." And it had Ladyhawke, Willow, and Princess Bride. One time, I found my oldest brother rewinding certain parts of Princess Bride over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, but 3 specific parts. And I'm like, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm memorizing each battle, each conversation battle. The sword fight, the feats of strength, and the battle of wits. So when the man in black faces off between those 3 guys, they have an ensuing conversation either before or during said confrontation." And he was determined to memorize every single line. The hardest part was understanding Andre the Giant in particular lines, especially without closed caption at the time, and it being on VHS.